Around 3 years after Jurassic Park debuted in theaters, the biggest story in the country was that we had cloned a sheep named Dolly. And if you think back to that period, the dark ages of the late 1990s, not really dark ages, they were great, but this was both a very exciting moment for scientists and the directors of various horror movies, and also a complete letdown for most everyone else. On the one hand, there was the promise that we could soon clone more interesting creatures like, say, T-Rexes or dragons, which are real, I'm told. That was pretty thrilling at some level. On the other hand, there was a very real, legitimate concern that by cloning Dolly, we had defied the natural order with a Frankenstein creation that contradicted basic principles of ethics, and that we had done so in order to clone perhaps the most boring and unintelligent animal on the planet. However you viewed the debate at the time in the late 1990s, nobody was quite sure where this technology would end up. By 2025, would T-Rexes be walking among us? Would we be able to clone ourselves and have little helpers doing our chores and going to our jobs for us? Nobody was quite sure. And that was both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But now in 2025, the mystery is gone. We finally have the answer to all these questions. Instead of cloning dinosaurs, now we're bringing back random extinct animals back to life using fossilized remains and some kind of gene editing technology. Specifically, as you may have seen this week, scientists claim to have resurrected, quote unquote, an extinct canine known as the dire wolf, which was last known to exist around 13,000 years ago. More recently, it's apparently been featured in Game of Thrones, so this particular brand of wolf has been experiencing something of a pop culture resurgence recently. Before we get into the implications here, I should note that while this animal does have a cool name, it frankly doesn't look very different from any other wolf, which is, I guess, not something you're supposed to say out loud, judging by all the breathless coverage of this development. Here, for example, is ABC News' segment on this astonishing new scientific breakthrough. Watch.
We turn now to that remarkable scientific breakthrough. 13,000 years after the last dire wolf walked the earth, scientists say they've now brought them back. Here's our chief national correspondent back up and with the video tonight.
Tonight, a howl 13,000 years in the making. In a first for science, biotech company Colossal Biosciences says it brought the extinct direwolf back to life, a species that hasn't walked the earth since the Stone Age.
The direwolf is the first de-extinct species. We've taken a gray wolf genome, a gray wolf cell, which is already genetically 99.5% identical to direwolves, and we've edited those cells at multiple places in its DNA sequence to contain the direwolf version of the DNA. That animal looks like a direwolf, it will behave like a direwolf, and it is a direwolf.
It looks like a direwolf, she says. It behaves like a direwolf, and therefore, it is a direwolf. Now, I'm willing to concede that somehow this woman knows how direwolves looked and behaved back in the Stone Age, even though we don't actually have any records of how they behaved back then. I'm not sure how this person could possibly have any clue about the mannerisms and personalities of animals that no modern human has ever laid eyes on. Let's just skip over that for a second. Even with that assumption, how do we also know that this new creation, which was created by combining fossilized remains with gray wolf DNA, is in fact a direwolf? I mean, where is that coming from exactly? As with so many other modern scientific insights, of course, it's basically made up. I mean, these creatures are not really direwolves, right? What is a direwolf? Well, it's not this. They are genetically modified gray wolves that have been given some of the features of their extinct cousins. In a world that constantly challenges our values, now is a time to stand tall and boldly proclaim the truth. This is your moment, your opportunity to come together with top leaders from education, faith, media, and culture who are committed to making a difference. Our high-profile featured speakers, such as myself, Michael Knowles, Harrison Butker, Kirk Cameron, and Father Mike Schmitz, will share their powerful stories and insights on how to rise above fear and take a stand for the truth, no matter the cost. You'll be empowered to fearlessly stand up for your values and beliefs, knowing that you're called for such a time as this. It's going to be a great night filled with VIP parties, photo ops, meet and greets, and a call to action that will leave you inspired. It is more than an event, it's a call to action. Together, we'll ignite the courage needed to transform our culture and bring light into the darkness. Will you answer the call? All proceeds benefits furthering the mission of Courage Under Fire and Regina Celli Academy to change our culture through education, the arts, law, and the pro-life cause. Regina Celli Academy is the largest and only nationally accredited classical homeschool hybrid with 23 locations and counting across the country. To learn more about Regina Celli Academy and the gala, head over to courageunderfiregala.org. That's courageunderfiregala.org. Use code IGNITE10 to receive 10% off your ticket today. Hurry, tickets are selling fast. And even more so than Dolly, these are Frankenstein creations that we're talking about. To be clear, I mean, it's fine if you want to argue that there's some major scientific relevance to this experiment. I'm just saying that these things aren't really literally what we're being told they are. And what's more apparent, though, is that this latest creation could have a lot of unintended side effects. And this is where the Jurassic Park comparison really comes into play. Quoting from the Daily Mail, I want you to listen to this quote. Although the wolves are being kept in captivity, experts warn that releasing them into the world could have disastrous consequences. Nick Rollins, a paleontologist at the University of Otago, compared the Colossal Biosciences' ambitious efforts with sci-fi classic Jurassic Park. If released into the wild in large enough numbers to establish a self-sustaining population, this new wolf could potentially take down prey larger than those hunted by gray wolves. There would also be the potential for increased human and wolf conflict. This sort of conflict is increasing as wolf populations recover in the USA. Close quote. Well, that's comforting. We may have created a new super wolf that will increase the potential for human and wolf conflict, whatever that means exactly. Nobody's really sure. Aside from being the premise for a Liam Neeson film, we don't know what that will look like in practice. We'll just have to deal with that conflict if these things ever escape captivity, apparently. But really, what are the odds of something like that happening? You know, I mean, if you can't trust the genetically modified Frankenstein super wolf to stay in their enclosure, then who can you trust? This is probably a good time to mention that there's basically no coherent ethical argument in favor of creating these new direwolf hybrids. They have there's like a million ethical problems. There is no answer to any of them. I mean, the most disturbing thing about this story is that the scientists involved don't seem to be grappling with the ethical dilemma at all. In fact, they seem to acknowledge that they're playing God explicitly and proudly. According to Time magazine, Beth Shapiro, the chief science officer at Colossal Biosciences, said, quote, "We are an evolutionary force. We're deciding what the future of these species will be." Yes, they're not researchers anymore. They're not conducting experiments to improve our lives or make new discoveries. Instead, they are an evolutionary force, which by definition means they're not accountable to anybody. You know, they are a higher power, supposedly. This is a trend that extends far beyond the field of wolf experiments. Recently, the New York Times published an article titled, "Should Human Life Be Optimized?" It's about how the science of IVF has developed. Quote, "Today, some form of pre-implantation genetic testing, or PGT, is used in over half of IVF cycles in the United States at a cost of $3,000 to $5,000 per batch of embryos. The most common options patients have are tests for extra or missing chromosomes, structural chromosome rearrangements that can trigger pregnancy loss and disorders linked to a single gene, such as cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy. More recently, with the advent of powerful statistical techniques that can analyze huge databases of genetic information, several American companies have started offering PGTP, which screens embryos for their polygenic risk scores. The technology has typically been used for adults, ostensibly to assess their probability of developing specific conditions. For example, people whose test show a high risk score for heart disease might change their diet or increase their physical activity. The article continues, quote, "But polygenic embryo screening goes further than the dubious promise of health. Studies have identified sets of genes linked to everything from educational attainment and height to mental health conditions such as depression and schizophrenia. It's one thing to screen for conditions like type 1 diabetes. It's quite another to go looking for embryo deemed most likely to clear 6 feet and test into the Ivy League." Now, what's interesting here is that, as the Times notes, several European countries, including Britain and Germany, have banned polygenic embryo screening. In Germany, they're particularly sensitive to this kind of thing, given their history of eugenics. But in the U.S., there is no regulatory oversight whatsoever for this kind of screening. It's already been heavily commercialized, and no one's paying attention to the industry at all. In other words, American leftists, who will screech relentlessly about how the Trump administration is essentially a Nazi regime, strangely have no issue with an industry that's dedicated entirely to eugenics. Somehow they're completely fine with screening embryos for certain genetic traits. That hasn't caused even a whisper of concern for a lot of these people. What this tells us is that playing God is incredibly intoxicating for a lot of people. It's enough to make scientists and self-described liberals forget all about their principles or lack thereof. But this kind of experimentation will ultimately end in disaster in every instance, for the simple reason that man cannot become God. And that's why decades after we clone the Dolly sheep, the best we can do is create a Frankenstein direwolf. And it's why everyone who is pretending to have supernatural powers to resurrect extinct species or to choose the ideal embryo is today canceled. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.